All right. Thank you all for joining to today's first Nephew SIG Release meeting. I see a few faces who stumbled in after the network architecture meeting. Appreciate that, but you're going to get a little bit of repetition here. The TSC, I don't know. There was supposed to be a meeting this week. I'm not sure. That never got scheduled, so they haven't actually met yet, which means we don't actually have any rules or procedures for how to pick our chair and our vice chair. But hopefully we'll have that in a couple of weeks. And so I'm just facilitating the meeting here while we, so we can get the ball rolling. As far as logistics, anybody's welcome to add something to this agenda. Just put your name in front of it like I did so that we know who to ask to lead that discussion. The other logistics, I think I had to just admit like one person here. If you use the same, if you have a Google account with the email address, you're subscribed to the mailing list. If you use that same Google account, you won't have to be admitted. You will just join in automatically. This is the group where we can discuss the tooling around that. So I don't think I have that on the agenda, but we can. It's kind of part of the project admin. It's the meeting software. All right, so I have a few items on the agenda here, and some of these we'll see how much discussion we want to have, but just to kind of refresh the overview, this SIG is really about how we take the products, the code and documentation and whatever other specifications are written by the other SIGs. How do we validate it, test it, build it, release it? And then the other half of this SIG is project administration. So what meeting software do we use? How do we control access to different organizational resources like GitHub? So there's a bunch of decisions we have to make. Like as we do this, we could just, go ahead and do it. But I think it's important that the community makes things work the way the community prefers. So that's kind of the scope here. I put a few items on the agenda, like I said, repository structure and management. So what do we want our repos to look like? I don't know how easy it is to discuss that verbally. It might be something more easily just done like with a proposal, but anyway, it's on the agenda. We need to talk about the release tooling. So my initial thoughts were to use Prow, which is what we use in Kubernetes, and it allows a bunch of actions and things to be taken in your PRs on GitHub, but it's also more work and more cost to run because we have to run it in a cluster somewhere, which would be on the Nephew. We'd run a GK cluster for Nephew and run Prow in that. But another option would be like GitHub Actions and code owners, which at the time Prow was written, GitHub didn't support those things, but it has some of these concepts now. So code owners is a way to manage who can approve code on a per directory basis within a repository. That's something that we need or will need eventually. And then the last thing I have on the agenda is project administration. And here's, there's a few items under there. So any comments before we just jump in and start talking about these one by one? Okay. Then I guess we'll take them one by one. The repo structure. So what I was thinking about here, if you look, and I'm coming from Kubernetes here, and even from other open source projects as well a little bit, but Kubernetes started with a mono repo. So this is like one repo with everything in it. And that has some advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are that it's sort of easier to consume and build, and people only have one place where they're raising issues and PRs, and it can be a little bit easier to keep track of. On the downside, it creates implicit dependencies as far as builds and things, so you don't easily, we can't easily emit different artifacts for different parts of the project. So if we're not going to do a mono repo, then we would need to decide what repos we want, how we want to structure our repos, what the point is. I think probably the best thing we can do here is, if anybody's interested in this problem, propose a few potential repo structures, and then maybe we discuss them online. So by propose, I mean either in the governance GitHub, create an issue, or create a Google Doc and send out to the SIG Release mailing list, or some other tool if you want. But it's probably a little hard to do just verbally here in a meeting, and it's maybe more appropriately done offline. Any thoughts on that from anybody else? Sure, Tim.
So just to add another option to your list, we can use subrepos. I'm not necessarily recommending it. It could be the worst of all worlds, but just could sometimes make sense.
So like those little Git, what do they call that? You can
yeah,
we go like where it's like almost a link. Like
exactly. It's like a symlink inside Git, and GitHub supports it pretty well, but I mean, you could end up creating a much bigger mess for yourself that way with versions and things. But in terms of just building in CI/CD, you can point it just to one repo, and then that repo points to others. So there are advantages to it, but in terms of management, it could actually make things worse. So I don't know.
Okay. Well, any volunteers on this? Otherwise, I'm willing to volunteer myself to make a proposal anyway, and then I'll send it out to the mailing list, and we can discuss it asynchronously.
Yeah, I volunteer to review your first draft.
Okay. All right. Okay, so release tooling. Here I explicitly put down need a volunteer, because so I was thinking originally, like I said, using Prow like in Kubernetes. There's a learning curve there. I've consumed Prow in the sense of done tons of stuff in the Kubernetes community for a long time, but I've never run Prow. We have lots of people internally at Google that have run Prow. So in that sense, it's, we have access to people, but they're all very busy, of course. The other option is GitHub Actions. I'm kind of inclined, and again, I'm asking for a volunteer here if possible, but I'm kind of inclined to go with the simplest thing first, which would be GitHub Actions. And then we can always do Prow later if we need to. But any other thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Shubham.
Yeah, so I'm from Magma community. We are building 4G, 5G core, and we are actually using GitHub Actions for all our CI work, and we have very long list of CI actions. So yeah, GitHub Actions is maybe the easiest tool right now we can start with. later if we see, okay, some things are not all there in GitHub Actions. For example, building ARM packages. So we use AWS or GCP for that matter. So yeah, for start with, yeah, we can use GitHub Actions. Thank you.
So you're using that for this, does it support, like I know in the past, other projects I've used like Circle CI or Travis CI, I think they offer some free usage for open source tools. Do you still need those, or do GitHub Actions replace those?
So yeah, we are just in GitHub Actions. We are just replacing all the CI jobs that use Circle CI. Now we are fully focusing on GitHub Actions. We also had Jenkins, but yeah, we have moved all the jobs.
Well, Shivan, sounds like, and Tal's got his hand up. I'll let him talk first.
Sure, a related comment. I love GitHub Actions in many ways. They're very easy to use. The issue here is it's very tied to GitHub. So if any of us would like to run CI/CD of Nephio in our labs or something, we'll be in a problem. So that kind of link could be an issue. It is fairly flexible. I mean, GitHub runs on Microsoft servers, but you could potentially plug in your own as well. So you could use a combination of GitHub and your own labs. But yeah, that link could potentially be a problem.
So I can add, we also had similar thoughts that, okay, if we start using GitHub Actions, we will stuck with a single vendor. But what we did as a solution, we started building all our CI process using Ansible scripts. So mostly what we try to do is we trigger the CI using Ansible, like GitHub Actions, then we run all those Ansible scripts. So if you want to port from GitHub Actions to GitLab Actions, then yeah, we can just move those Ansible scripts and they will run there. So this can be a solution.
Well, Shubhan, can I ask that you take a few minutes and sort of document what you've done in Magma and how that might apply here, and we can make a proposal and we can discuss it offline, similar to what we'll be doing for the repository structure, unless there's other folks who want to chime in right now.
Maybe one last quick point. We don't have to use GitHub. We could use GitLab. And again, the advantage there that, GitLab is very easy for anybody to run internally. It's completely open source. GitHub is more tied to Microsoft, of course. So if we standardize on GitLab Actions, then maybe we can bypass that potential problem. Just another thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought because sort of, I'm personally super familiar with GitHub and been using it for a long time, but we actually have if you think about Nephio itself, right? The repositories are part of Nephio itself, and so it's likely we'll be at some point needing to support GitHub, GitLab, and other types of repository to consume packages from and to write packages to. So anyway, I don't know. That's an interesting thought too. I mean, you're welcome to write up something, Tal, if you think it's a useful thing. We can have a discussion. Maybe, Shubhan, you didn't answer me whether you're available to do it. If you are,
Yes.
that would be awesome.
Yeah. So what I can do, yeah, I'm on the Nifio's Confluence wiki, so I can create a page there and then I can write all that up.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that would be great. And then send a note to the mailing list with a link to it, so we're aware it's ready, and then we can have a discussion there.
Sure. Thanks.
And that brings up another point. Like, we have multiple tooling. Well, go ahead. It sounds like Tal was going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't have a clear proposal to give here. I just want to make sure that when we make a decision, that if it comes to a vote or something like that, that everybody really has the full information to understand what the decision means. So, just want that to be there.
Okay. Okay, great. Then we get to project admin, and so that actually the wiki comment brings up another point. So we have multiple. It's not on my agenda here, but it falls right into project admin. This has kind of come up repeatedly. We sort of have two different heritages of open source collaboration models colliding a little bit. The way most of the LFN projects work with groups.io, with a wiki, versus the Kubernetes side, which is more things all happen in GitHub for the most part, and maybe Google Docs and mailing lists, but 99% is in GitHub. GitHub has both advantages and disadvantages from my point of view compared to, say, a wiki. A wiki is super easy to add stuff to, and but for sort of authoritative information, a wiki makes me a little wary because anybody can come in and mess with it. And there's no approval processes or anything for those changes. So that's the blessing and the curse of GitHub, is the pull request process and the approval process. So some context, the Linux Foundation does sort of want to experiment a little bit in the tooling and see how it would work with some of the Google tooling, which is part of the reason. Partly it's because I'm familiar with it and I've been so far the one setting most of this stuff up. So, you do what you know. And so setting up Workspace and using Google Docs and all that is part of the reason. It's simply because it's what I'm familiar with, and the ones doing the work sometimes just make the decisions in the moment. And so but I know it's caused some friction for some folks. So anyway, this is the group where we would talk about what approach we want to use. I think it's useful, like I said, for the even from the Linux Foundation, they're sort of curious about trying out some new tools to see how they work. So in that sense, I'd like to give at least a try to what we're doing. But anyway, I this is a community, so let's gather other folks' thoughts. Yeah, Tal.
So I'm involved in a few Linux Foundation CNCF groups that use Git for such documentation. So as you said, like having the approval. So if somebody wants to change something, they make a pull request, and then there's some approval to it. My opinion about it is that it is a complete nightmare. It discourages participation and contribution. Not everybody is comfortable with making pull requests, and just the whole procedure is such a pain that if people don't want to, if it's too hard to contribute, even if it's something small, then they don't. But I think especially in the early stages of this project, we want as much feedback and contribution, even little things, even spelling corrections, things like that. So to lower the bar as much as we can for participation, I think should be our goal. So I'm in favor of Google Docs, but also wikis are pretty much the same. There are also some tools that are more markdown based. So
Okay.
But to make it really easy to add,
I would suggest wiki because some people in Asia probably they cannot access to Google Doc.
Okay, thank you. Shuban?
Yeah. So regarding the documentation, I would like to add that because this is a technical product, we should be using some product with we can leverage the versioning, maybe like read the docs. So we can specify, okay, these docs are tied to this specific version. And with read the docs is simply like creating a new PR on GitHub and it will automatically get published. And we don't have to host anything because we can use GitHub pages. So no hosting there, everything can be on GitHub. So we can easily update it.
So a couple questions, and I don't know if somebody can take notes. Because I'm a little concerned. We probably should have had somebody volunteer to be a note taker in the last meeting too, because I feel like I hate having these meetings and then everybody forgets. But a couple questions. So for like official product documentation, I think the approval process is necessary. Like I don't, and whatever so like GitHub PRs there. I hear Tal's point, and that I totally agree. In fact, part of the reason part of the reason Nefio and the stuff, remember Brian's talk from the summit, is that GitOps is a pain in the ass, right? I mean, excuse my language, but it can be really painful. And so we do want to avoid that and lower the bar wherever we can. I'm trying to think though, like, how do we, I mean, maybe I'm just overly paranoid that people will come in and screw things up, but like, without any kind of approval process in place, like in the wiki, having it have any kind of authority to me seems questionable. So official documentation that is just on the wiki leaves me with some discomfort. Not that that's a reason to make a decision necessarily, but I guess experience from other communities would be helpful. And but for like these proposals and things, probably it makes sense. We'll see how the interactivity of the wiki is. I mean, the great thing about PRs is you can go to an individual line and make a comment, and same with Google Docs, you can go to an individual line and make a comment. I don't know that the wiki supports that kind of workflow, that collaboration. Does anybody? I'm not as like, I haven't used wikis that much in years, so I'm not sure.
Well, the GitHub wiki won't let other people just edit willy-nilly. So it's only contributors to the project. So there is some permissions. So we won't have a problem with spam, or I'm not sure what you're worried about, but yeah,
I'm talking about the Confluence wiki in the wiki.nephew.org right now. Anybody can. It's actually an open.
Oh,
I mean, you could probably constrain it to that LFA.
yeah, we can. Linux Foundation can definitely constrain it. I guess again, initially they just want to make it as open as possible, but for GitHub specifically, we can list contributors to a repository, and only they would be able to affect the wiki. And I think you even have permissions per wiki and even per pages, maybe. But it could be that whatever the wiki can be a draft area where we work together on ideas and brainstorm and get feedback and contributions. And when it moves towards official documentation, we could probably move to more strict workflow. To me,
that's kind of what, yeah, that's kind of where I am too.
Yeah, then you can create a web page for the approved needs to be announced or published document. That's totally okay. But for many LF projects, wiki works very well.
Okay. Well, does anybody want to put together a little thing on the wiki that describes kind of our agreed upon, I mean, not that we've necessarily agreed, but another proposal to say, hey, here's going to be the general process. I mean, SIGs might do things their own ways, like certainly in Kubernetes, like at least in Kubernetes, the SIGs have sort of a lot of freedom to do whatever they want, but it's usually helpful for there to be a sort of recommended process for people to follow, so that people working across the community don't get confused. So I would love a volunteer to document and or propose our kind of process for proposals, iterating on those proposals, and then publishing the results.
Yeah, so I have a question. So are we talking about like technical documentations or other documentation, like how infrastructure is set up and how meetings are going and all that? The
Uh,
wiki is complex, right? So the wiki that we are talking about.
Pardon me?
So we are talking about like wiki,
Yeah.
like we should use wiki for docs. That is like wiki.nefio.org, like the Confluence page or the GitHub wiki.
I think that's the question. I mean, I think that if there's too many places for people to go, people will get confused.
Yes.
We want to, that's kind of the state we're in right now, right? We're kind of, there's a confused state where some things are in, well, very little is in GitHub because of the high bar. And then other stuff's on Wiki. And, you know, so process and project documentation, you know, this is what we have to figure out. You know, we have both project and process documentation, like you said, and we have the technical documentation of the product itself. The technical documentation of the product itself should show up at some point on nefio.org in a sort of official released version, as you mentioned, capacity that applies to a specific version, whether that's using something like Read the Docs or whether it's directly on the Nefio website. I don't know. That we'll have to figure out at some point in this group as part of our release process. But I'm just talking about, like, how do people know where to, you know, where's the schedule for the SIG meetings? Where's the, if I want to propose this repository structure, where do I do it? And if I want to raise issues, this is where GitHub comes in, like raising issues. Seems like that's the right place to do it. And so how do we tie these things together? That's what we need to figure out in this group as part of project administration, how we're going to do that. And you know, I would love, like I said, a volunteer to propose how to do that, and we can.
Yeah. So like I can add in, mostly in all the LF projects, they use wiki.project website, that is Confluence. So if you are like, we need all these data, I think Confluence is the best place. We can add as many pages as we want. We can add trees, and this data can be easily found. Anyone can search it, and it's easily distributable. Yeah, so we can share it. So
Okay,
yeah,
I mean,
Confluence.
that's fine. It's like coming more from the CNCF space. Like, I don't see that used very much, and so that's why, you know, like I said, me setting it up wasn't. And I think that as long as we have a way to deal with authoritative documents in a different way, I'm okay with that. And, you know, not that it's up to me. Any other thoughts? Okay, so it sounds like then the plan right now, I think I mean like operational, but I'll just say process. Yeah. So along those lines, I had on here, we need a volunteer to create a GitHub page with the SIG information, basically all of this stuff here for each SIG. It's basically the email I sent out the other day. But it sounds like we should just put it on the wiki. But probably what we need to do then is update our GitHub pages to say, hey, here's where you find this information. So governance, where there's an approval process needed, the governance pages likely are still going to live on GitHub because they're more authoritative. I don't want people editing them, but like all of this kind of meeting schedules and things like that, we can move to the wiki. Any volunteers to add all that to the wiki? Okay, well, I guess I'll do it. You know how to organize it and see. Oh, so like Tal, you were talking about, right? There's collaborators. So there's organization members in GitHub. And assuming we're still using GitHub, we'll need some procedure for determining who's an organization member, what authority they have, all of that stuff. And that's, I'm thinking right now, we just wait for the TSC and what they come up with for the general sort of operational procedures for the community, and we comment on that from there. Anybody have any different ideas?
I think the Linux Foundation has standard ways to do this. We could just copy their procedure. It seems to work.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I know in CNCF projects I'm part of, each project comes up with it on their own, but maybe Linux Foundation can give us some guide. Maybe with the LFM project, it's a little different.
Yeah, CNCF and Edge are all part of the Linux Foundation. So the procedure pretty much is the same or similar.
Well, like Kubernetes, for example, right? There's a process for which people become a Kubernetes organization member, or CordianS, which is another CNCF project I'm part of. It's basically, we don't have a process. It's just some of us decide to. I mean, we have a process for becoming a maintainer. We don't have a process for becoming a administrator in the GitHub organization. It's just was up to our project leader, really. So this relates to the governance model in that way, right? So that if the authority flows from the TSC to the SIG leads of some sort, like, and to those organizations to manage the GitHub repositories and who has authority to merge code and things like that, like there has to be a process for determining who becomes a committer, right? We have this concept in the charter of committer versus contributor, and a committer has to earn that privilege somehow, and the TSC has to figure out what that process is to earn that privilege. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. But
Yeah, so besides charter, we probably need technical community document and describe
exactly.
the life cycle of all of these roles. And Camden and I have done this for Alpha Edge, but it's, well, we can send to you for leverage.
Well, I think Condon was going to put together those, but he's not
Okay.
for the most part.
I know.
So yeah, so I think we're going to get this. He was going to propose something, and then the TSC needs to vote on it and argue over it or whatever you guys are going to do. And then yeah, so it sounds like you agree we should not even think about this until after that stuff, which probably makes sense. Okay, then the only other thing we haven't talked about that I had on the agenda was we're trying to get a Slack instance set up. I did set one up, but then it was like, you have to pay like some outrageous sum of money. And Linux Foundation actually, all their other Slack instances, they have some sort of deal. And so I've talked to the Linux Foundation about getting us that same deal. And that's where it's sitting right now with them to figure out how to negotiate that with Slack and how they did that in the past. So I'm hoping to get a Slack instance up as soon as possible, because a lot of this stuff will be easier if we can talk more regularly. I guess I could, again, getting, like, we could try and do a Google Chat for it, which we obviously use internally a lot. I'm not sure how flexible that is to being open to public chats, which is why I haven't even really looked at it. They did just release something that you can have like 8,000 people in a chat space, but I think that I prefer to go to Slack because I think it's more. I've seen it used well in this kind of environment before, where I haven't seen chat do that.
Right, because Slack has been used kind of official communication channel in Linux Foundation. Fully
Okay.
agree.
Right. Okay. Yeah, sure, Ben.
Can't we like sign up for a free Slack for starting?
I did, but unless I did something wrong, it was not clear that it wasn't clear to me that I could invite people outside of. Well, I guess I did sign up for something. I can try and share it. It doesn't. I'm just not sure if you need a nefio.org email address to do it. That was the impression I got, but I actually didn't try and do it with a different non-nefio.org email address, and those cost Nefio money. So we're not like handing those out like candy. They're workspace accounts. They're like $5 a month or something. So if we had thousands of them, it would, it adds up. We don't have like a huge budget at the Linux Foundation right now. So so if we can get it for free from Slack, which I think we can, that's probably preferable. Yeah, Tal.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything bad about Google Chat to offend my Google friends here. We use it internally too, but Slack at least has a very mature integrations with GitHub.
Yeah.
So there are nice things we'd be able to do with Slack that could help us be more productive.
Yeah, I don't think chat's the right choice for this right now. And I think tons of people use Slack and are familiar with it, along the same lines. Yeah, Shuban.
Yeah. So can I like take this up? I would like to like try setting up a free Slack and see if that invitation works, and we can use that initially. Then we can move to the LF Slack later on.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any more agenda items, so we have some asynchronous work to do. If nobody else has things they want to talk about, then we can probably wrap this up in the next couple minutes, and then Shivam, I can try and send you an invite right now.
Yeah,
we can just try and
yeah,
see if it works.
yeah, that will be good. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a quick question, Tina, you might know the answer. So on the agenda too is which meeting software to use. I know we've been using Google Meet. I know it also is sometimes a problem with companies in China. Are things okay now?
No, I'm not from China. I live in Palo Alto. I'm just speaking for
Yeah,
the
but
other.
you did mention some challenges with Chinese companies, so I thought you might know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can use anything Google related. I'm sorry. They have Baidu. And probably we use Slack and use Wiki. That works, at least for Alphedge. I'm the board chair there. It works.
I wonder if it might be a good idea to ask about this to the mailing list and just get feedback from users to see if, because I did hear some comments about Google Meet as well during even the workshop. So I wonder if Google Meet is just a big challenge for people. I know Zoom is used a lot with Chinese companies. They don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, so I think, Linux Foundation gone through all of this feedback, and because there were 1/3 of the member companies are from China. So Zoom, Slack, Wiki, other things work worldwide.
Right. Yeah, and that like I said, that's also the purview of this group. So if we want to switch to Zoom, that's fine. We need to get a Zoom account from our Linux Foundation needs to set that up for us. So it's certainly a feasible thing. We had talked about that even before the summit, but because when we're hosting the summit in the Google offices, Zoom won't work well with our in-room meeting system. So, but for all these other meetings, there's no reason why we can't move to something else. For those few of us who are from Google, it's kind of a pain because we have to use the web client. We can't. I guess we probably can get an exception and install the Zoom client on our laptops, but typically we don't have it on there. And the web client's not great, but that's not a reason not to do it. I do it in the Kubernetes community all the time. So,
Yeah, unless you can use the web version.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. It's acceptable.
So we're obviously Linux users here, and the Zoom client on Linux is also not great, but I use the web client all the time, and it's fine.
Okay. So that's probably a shift we should make as well. We just have to figure out with Linux Foundation how to get the Zoom account set up and permissions and all that. It shouldn't be a big deal. So I can send something. I think it's probably, I mean, I could send something out on the mailing list, but I think, unless there's somebody who objects, I'm not going to make a fuss about moving to Zoom. Unless there's somebody who's like really wants meet, I think we're fine with that.
How about sending a poll about it just to the mailing list to see what the
Okay.
issues
That's
are?
easy enough.
But not just preference, to see in the poll if there are people who are absolutely blocked from using Google services.
Well, so my experience in the Kubernetes community is that, technically people are blocked, but practically they find ways around it. But, that's not necessarily a position we want to put people in, that they would have to do that. So
yeah, that's probably not a good thing to do.
yeah. So.
Sorry, Google.
Yeah. It's above all of our heads whether they argue with China or not. All right. Well, is there any other topics people want to discuss, or shall we give ourselves back 15 minutes to work on? We got asynchronous work to do, like I said. Okay, so let me just quickly review the action items that came out.
You know what? Can I ask a quick question, maybe?
Of course.
So, how do you understand SIG release, right? According to the agenda, I'm trying to figure out what it's going to be responsible for, but the scope seems procedural, right? But do you see it also having an effect on how an FPO is really built and what it does? Are decisions going to be made here, do you think, that could affect FPO as a whole?
I see this SIG as, I mean, obviously it's up to us as a community to decide, but what I see the SIG as is largely those support services of, the builds, the tests. So it could own the test infrastructure, for example, own the build infrastructure, own the project administration. If I model it, if I think about Kubernetes, like there's actually 2 different SIGs, or maybe 3 different SIGs that do what we do here, 4 different SIGs. But the reality is, we're much smaller and don't necessarily need that level of, certainly in the beginning, that level of division. But so I see it as owning the process of getting a bunch of source code and actually building artifacts, building binaries that will run this software, and releasing those binaries and testing those binaries, making sure that they work. And then as a sort of second leg, the project administration pieces around, getting all what we've just been talking about for the last 15
Yeah.
minutes.
maybe I'll add my thought that I think what could happen here. This is where the rubber hits the road, or where the proof is in the pudding. I don't know which cliche to use, but I could see this SIG having a pushback effect, because there might be some theoretical things, even within the machinery SIG, the ideas to build things, but when you move to putting them in practice, you might find significant problems. So I could see this SIG having a potential de facto veto kind of role for the rest of the NetPO project, where if things really don't work well here in integration, then this would be an important pushback for machinery and even architecture. If some idea that we come up with really does not work well in practice, then this is where we're going to find it out.
Do you see that as a good thing or a bad thing?
I see it as a necessary thing.
Okay.
This is a reality check, right?
Right.
And this thing. So yeah, all SIGs will have to work together, of course, but just kind of a note.
No, I appreciate that. That's great. That's great, especially in the first meeting to try and set the tone. I think that I will say, like, the SIG structure itself is a first draft. And so, or maybe it's a second draft. We had a first draft back in the community meeting back in May. But, like, this is what we think we need. And we will probably learn over the next, several quarters whether it actually serves us. And so, the reason I bring that up is I want people to keep an open mind about, all it will take to add SIGs and remove SIGs in the future is a proposal to the TSC, and they can decide to change it. So don't feel locked into these SIGs. These are our first draft of what we think is needed, and we will learn. So
okay, and maybe a meta question. So the decision was to have the SIGs meet bi-weekly.
Arbitrary decision by me.
Yeah. So what was the thinking, right? And they're also not scattered. It's like 1 week of big meetings and then a week of nothing, no NetPO meetings, alternating, right?
Yeah, that probably makes sense. Yeah, some of the SIG, there should be like 2 SIG meetings a week or something like that.
I think that
Every other week.
there's 2 aspects to there's well, at least 2 thoughts I have there. One is each SIG, we can all change that. Like right now, we can just send out a note to the mailing list saying, we don't like this. What do people think? And do another poll, and no problem at all. There's no investment in this schedule as far as I'm concerned. The schedule, this quote's come up for me in the last week or so in a couple different scenarios, but something my dad said to me once. He's like, he was talking about like a little local township hall meeting, right? And he goes to this meeting, rarely does, but like he wanted to do some particular project. So he shows up at the meeting, and, they go ahead with the project. And he's like, a lot of times in these environments, and this so applies to open source, which is why it keeps coming up to me, is like, the world is run by the people who show up. Like, if you're there and the decisions are being made, you can have an influence on them. If you don't show up, you take what you get. So all of this is like, we needed to get the ball rolling. So me and Steven and a few other people just said, let's just do it. And then let's adjust. So that's why I keep saying, like, it's a first draft, the SIG structure, all of it. We're not wedded to any of this. We're not trying to dictate anything. We're just trying to make things happen. And so, like, if it doesn't work for people, totally open to changing it. The time schedules, I know I have to be here. So I picked times that work for me, and I looked at my calendar, right? Like, for the network architecture one, where maybe I'm not going to be every week, every couple of weeks, they might change it to a time that doesn't work for me, but that's fine. Right? So like, we're a community. We want to be open. We want to be collaborative. And so all of this, anything is subject to questioning and change. So please.
That's fine, and it's very appreciated. But I wonder, the timelines we set, having some sort of release by the end of the year, bi-weekly meetings is a little slow, right? So not opposed to it. I don't like meetings, so it's nice not
Oh.
not to have meetings for a week. But I wonder in terms of how quickly we want to move if it'll work.
That's a great point. That was the other thing. I said there were two things, and then I only said one. The other thing is those. I don't necessarily see. So these are sort of like, okay, in at least in Kubernetes, which I'm, has been my most involved open source project for the last few years. Like we have both regular SIG meetings, and then we have within the SIGs there's sub projects, or there's also working groups. There's like it's a much bigger community. There's a lot more organization, but those might have 2 or 3 meetings a week. Some of those. There's no reason why a group of us in this SIG, as long as we keep it a public meeting, we put it on our public calendar, we record it and we post it to YouTube. There's no reason why we can't meet every single day. This is why I believe like Slack will make this a lot easier, because we can just like be like, hey, who wants to meet? We need to make progress on this particular thing. Can we meet 3 times this week and make it happen? I'm happy with changing the cadence of the official SIG, all SIG meeting to something more frequent. I did also think 2 weeks is kind of slow in the beginning, but I also have a packed schedule. So, as I'm sure everybody else does. So like maybe we should discuss this on the mailing list, send out a note, Cal, just say, hey, it seems a little slow, can we make faster progress? I know for me, I'm kind of the next 2 weeks, like I've already talked about in the last meeting, what I'm sort of working on. We also can stagger them better. Like I said, it all can be changed.
I love this approach. I think it could be very effective. My suggestion would be, because if most of our schedules are weekly schedules, so if we have if for example we know on Monday this is the slot, so next week we don't have a meeting, but we can call an ad hoc meeting if we want. So it's already on people's calendars. It's probably a time where people are open, so we could do maybe the bi-weekly official cadence, but then an option for an ad hoc meeting in between those weeks, possibly.
You could even
like
put a calendar entry out of off week working meeting or office hours, or something like that.
In Oasis, we call it ad hoc, but yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts before we go? Oh.
Yeah, pretty good as a first meeting.
Okay. All right. Why don't we send out a note? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's like if it's an ad hoc meeting, people could just choose not to go. So maybe I can do that. I can set up an off kilter for each of these 4 meetings. I mean, the question is, do we want to pack in the ones you have to go to all in the same week or not? Selfishly, that's the off week for me on my Kubernetes meetings that are every 2 weeks that I have to go to. But that's just
I would say maybe we can propose this to the mailing list, see what people think. I think the problem, as you said, the showing up thing, I think if there is a ad hoc meeting on the schedule, then people think, oh, if we don't show up, decisions will be made without us, so they'll feel compelled to maybe come. So ad hoc means it will be called when it's necessary. So if we have a meeting, let's say this is our meeting, our official meeting, and at the end of the meeting we say, oh, we have stuff to do, let's call an ad hoc next week. So I don't know if it should be on people's calendar or not. I don't know. There are pros and cons.
Send out a note, Tal, since it's your suggestion. I would ask that you send out a note to the mailing list.
Okay, I'll do that.
Defining it. That'd be awesome. All right. Okay, cool. Thank you all then. If there's no other comments, we can get 2 minutes back. And who was going to help me? Was it Shubham with the Slack? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
This is where it would be nice to have Slack, so you could just ping me on Slack. Is the email address that's listed in the group?
Yeah, it's
Good
on the wiki Confluence.
Okay.
Are you? Yeah, you're there. Yeah, you can catch me in there.
I'll try and invite you with that email address, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Okay, all right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.